Today I'm bringing you the strongest endgame ranged rogue build, the Barrage Trapper, which quickly pulls in massive hordes of enemies and then eviscerates them with a barrage of arrows that explode, spread vulnerable, and even heal you. What separates this build from others is that we quickly get our trap skills back, including our ultimate Death Trap, in a matter of seconds, and we have incredible survivability thanks to massive damage reduction stacking from our gear, from legendary aspects, and from our Paragon points, which all help you push into tier 4 even as early as the low level 60s without sacrificing on the massive damage output of the build, and then this build works all the way up to level 100. This is going to be an in-depth guide covering the gameplay loop, the entire skill tree, legendary aspects, the roles you want on your gear, and the Paragon board, so be sure to click on the timestamps to skip to the section you need. If you're still leveling 1 to 50, then I'd recommend my Barrage leveling build instead, which relies less on gear and specific legendary aspects so you don't waste time getting to level 50. Afterwards though, you definitely want to switch to this version, which scales far better to tier 3 and tier 4 activities, including the higher tiers of Nightmare Dungeons. So the core gameplay loop of the build is to use Death Trap to suck in enemies into one location, use Puncture to build up 3 combo points, and then use Shadow Imbuement with Barrage to deal devastating damage, spread vulnerable, and heal yourself. Poison Trap on top of Death Trap adds more damage over time, crowd control, damage reduction, and even has a chance to instantly reset your Shadow Imbuement. With our key passive Exposure, you massively reduce the cooldown of both of your traps, sometimes even resetting them instantly if you get enough lucky hits. In higher tiers, the thing that is going to get you killed is if your character is crowd controlled, so we use Shadow Step as our main movement ability that lets us become unstoppable and break any stun, freeze, fear we have on us. Let's go over our skill tree in more detail. You want 1 point in Puncture, the main combo builder, which also effectively applies a form of crowd control, slow, to our enemies. Enhanced Puncture increases energy regeneration, and then Fundamental Puncture applies vulnerable, which is going to form one of the key affixes that we want to maximize in this build. Barrage is our main offensive skill, which unleashes a volley of arrows. The more combo points we build up, the more arrows we unleash, up to 8 arrows each, with a chance to ricochet. Now this attack does have some range, but in my eyes it works best when used up close, almost like a shotgun. When all 8 arrows hit an elite, it's going to absolutely melt them. Enhanced Barrage increases our ricochet chance to 100% when we damage a vulnerable enemy or critically strike them, which is going to be practically every enemy with this build. And then Improved Barrage makes every third cast of Barrage spread vulnerable. You want 1 point in Sturdy, so you can put 3 points into Siphoning Strikes, which forms the main basis of our healing. Whenever we critically strike enemies, we gain a small chunk of our health back. Remember, we're firing a minimum of 8 arrows each time, and each one can critically strike, so this quickly adds up. You want 1 point into Shadow Step, which is our main ability which breaks crowd control. 3 points into Weapon Mastery. We're going to be using a crossbow for this build, so our critical strike damage is boosted. We put 1 point into Dark Shroud and then points into Enhanced and Countering Dark Shroud. You'll notice Dark Shroud isn't in the toolbar of abilities we're actively using, and that's because we actually get Dark Shroud automatically thanks to a legendary aspect I'll talk about later, so you want the bonuses from it still though. 1 point into Poison Trap, which thanks to Enhanced Poison Trap knocks down enemies, and Countering Poison Trap gives it a 30% chance to reset your imbuement skills instantly. You want 3 points into Exploit and 3 points into Malice to further boost your damage, 5 points into Shadow Imbuement, which is going to seriously boost Barrage damage thanks to its explosions, and we get Enhanced and Blended Shadow Imbuement. 1 point into Deadly Venom to allow us to get 3 points into Debilitating Toxin, so we get 15% damage reduction from enemies in our Poison Trap. 3 points into Precision Imbuement, which increases our critical strike chance of our Shadow Barrage by a further 9%, and then 1 point into Shadow Crash, so we can put 2 points into Consuming Shadows for more energy regeneration. For our ultimate, we get Death Trap, which pulls in enemies thanks to Prime Death Trap, and with Supreme Death Trap, if the trap itself kills an enemy, which it usually does, then the cooldown is reduced by 10 seconds. We put 3 points into Trap Mastery to gain even more critical strike chance, 1 point into Adrenaline Rush so we can put 3 points into Haste, and then our key passive is Exposure, which has a chance to reduce the cooldown both of your Death Trap and Poison Trap whenever they inflict damage. Trust me, this happens a lot. Now let's move on to our Paragon board. There really should be a focus on survivability as well as damage increases here. We start off by getting a very easy 20% damage bonus and then place the Ranger glyph into our first glyph slot. Not only for the damage increase, but because we can get a very easy 10% damage reduction unlocked. You want both the 20% damage increase and 200 armor unlocks on the first board, as they have very low stat requirements for the bonus unlocks, which isn't going to be the case later on in the next Paragon boards. For the first legendary, I actually went for the Eldritch Paragon legendary node to boost our shadow imbuement damage by a further 20%, and the rare node imbuer for even more imbuement damage, which will take your shadow barrage damage to very high levels very early on. The reason why I went for this is because we could get some big damage increases with very little investment into the board before moving on to the next Paragon board in this orientation. If you're struggling with survivability, then go for the next Paragon board first before getting the Eldritch node. So our next unlock is going to be Deadly Ambush, where we gain a whopping further 23% increased critical strike damage to enemies affected by trap damage. Cunning gives you even more damage reduction for enemies affected by traps. Be sure to pick up those little magic nodes, each giving 2% further damage reduction. We then put our second main glyph, Exploit, which is going to increase vulnerable damage, and with its additional bonus, you're going to randomly apply vulnerable when you just damage any enemy every 20 seconds per enemy, which is nuts. Make sure you pick up the Engineering rare node to get a damage boost to enemies affected by trap skills, then go downwards in the Paragon board to unlock your next Paragon board, picking up the Trapper rare node along the way to further improve damage. I then went for the Exploit Weakness legendary node, which is going to create a stacking damage bonus against vulnerable enemies. With the way Barrage works, sending 8 arrows minimum, this quickly adds up and will help against elites, which are a bit tankier. My third glyph is the Combat glyph, which is going to increase critical strike damage even further. I'm later going to pick up the Artifice rare node to boost vulnerable damage, then go right on the Paragon board to pick up Hunter Killer, which is a very easy 32% damage boost against elites, which is crazy. The additional bonus damage is dexterity based, which you're naturally going to have more of as a rogue anyways. Go then pick up the legendary node, then go downwards and pick up both Exploit and Unassailable for more damage and damage reduction, and remember to pick up the magic nodes around both of these nodes as well, as they quickly add up. Let's go through the legendary aspects with this build. I'll go through some of the optimal ones that I'm using, and if there's any others that will work with the build as well. On my helmet, I have on Aspect of Might. This is probably one of the most important aspects for survivability, as whenever you use your basic skill, which is a lot in this build when you're building up combo points, you gain a whopping 20% damage reduction. Now, there is a codex version for this that gives you 20% DR for 2 seconds after using your puncture, but honestly, if you can get lucky and get one to drop for a slightly longer duration, like 4+ seconds, or if you're lucky like me for the whole 6 seconds, you're pretty golden. For my chest piece, I've imprinted Aspect of Disobedience, which gives a stacking bonus to armor, which if you didn't know, indirectly gives you damage reduction. The codex version does suffice, but again, this is one where if you can get one to drop with higher bonuses, it's going to massively help with survivability. For my gloves, I put on Aspect of Corruption, which increases shadow imbuement potency against vulnerable enemies. Again, there's a codex version, but this only offers a 20% boost. For my legs, I've put the Umbrous aspect on, which has a pretty high chance to generate a free Dark Shroud when you critically strike with a lucky hit. The Dark Shroud we get from this gains all the bonuses from our skill tree, which is why we put those points in. Again, Dark Shroud is going to give you even more damage reduction, so this is a must in my eyes. This one is not available from the codex, So gamble obols by rolling pants and hope you get it to drop. On my boots, I have the Ravager's aspect, which is again not available from the codex. This gives you a second charge of Shadow Step, which is super helpful for survivability when breaking back-to-back CCs. Gamble for boots via obols if you need this aspect. For your crossbow, which is your two-handed weapon, which means we get double the bonus from the aspect, you want to have Edgemaster's aspect, which again is obtainable from the codex, but you ideally want a high roll from a drop, which is going to boost barrage damage by a serious amount based on how much energy we have when we cast it. And with some of our remaining aspects, we'll make sure we don't have any energy shortages. On the amulet, which gains a 50% bonus, I place the aspect of branching volleys, which is going to give your barrage arrows a chance to create a second arrow to ricochet off. On our rings, we place the accelerating aspect, which increases our attack speed when we critically strike with our barrage, and this attack speed bonus is pretty palpable. On my second ring, I place the Ravenous aspect, which is obtainable from the codex at a pretty powerful baseline and gives you up to a 70% increased energy regeneration rate when you kill a vulnerable enemy. Honestly, this alone at codex power felt sufficient for my energy regeneration needs. But if you are struggling with energy regeneration, then use aspect of the Umbral on your first ring where I placed the accelerating aspect. The only issue with the aspect of Umbral is that the codex version isn't very good and you really rely on a good drop instead. On your one-handed weapon, you want aspect of the expectant, which is going to increase your barrage damage each time you use puncture as you build up more combo points. So this is just going to happen passively without changing your gameplay much. And then the only unique I'd highly recommend getting for this build is the Condemnation Dagger, for its aspect which not only boosts barrage damage by up to 40%, but gives you a 30% chance to immediately get 3 combo points, which really saves time and boosts DPS massively as you're not wasting time building combo points with 3 uses of puncture every time. Any rogue build which relies on combo points, this is going to be one of the most important items to obtain for this aspect. If you don't have this, don't worry, the build doesn't fall apart. Sometimes you don't even notice yourself getting the instant 3 combo points with the way the combo points toolbar is positioned low on the screen. Honestly, I feel that Blizzard needs to maybe put an audio cue when you have 3 combo points, which will help this unique a lot. If you don't have this unique, then on your second one-handed weapon, you want to place the Vengeful aspect, which has a stacking bonus to increase critical strike chance when you make an enemy vulnerable. Now let's go over our gear. I'll get this out of the way at the start. You want to use a crossbow over a bow. Why? Well, assuming they have the exact same DPS, a bow needs to fire more often to maintain that same DPS, so you're going to use more energy spamming barrage more often. Moreover, crossbows have an innate bonus to vulnerable damage, which works well with the build. And then you want swords over daggers because they innately have critical strike damage bonuses rather than a close damage bonus. The only exception to this is the Condemnation Dagger unique we discussed before, which lets us bypass building up combo points. Now let's go over the ideal rolls. The main mantra here is going to be stacking critical strike chance, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage for our offensive affixes, and then various damage reductions and maximum life to increase survivability. But let's get into specifics with each item. I'll say what the ideal god roll is and then show you my roll for comparison. For your helmet, ranks of shadow imbuement, total armor, cooldown reduction, and maximum life are probably going to be your 4 main important affixes. For your chest piece, you want damage reduction. The plain damage reduction without any conditions is the best. Total armor, then damage reduction from close, distant, or poisoned enemies. You can go with all damage reduction and armor rolls here as your 4 affixes, but if you're surviving okay and you want to boost damage, there are options like imbuement skill damage, range weapon damage, and marksman skill damage that are viable as well. For your gloves, the 2 most important things are ranks of barrage. You want a minimum of 3, ideally 4 when fully upgraded, and critical strike chance, which you want a good roll for. Then attack speed, lucky hit chance are probably the next best things. For your pants, again, all damage reduction types, plain, distant, close, poisoned enemies are all going to be huge here. My pants here actually have ranks of Poison Trap and Dark Shroud, but honestly ranks in both of these skills don't actually give that much value in terms of either damage or survivability, So go for all 4 damage reduction rolls here. For your boots, I prefer boots with extra evade charges, but a lot of people prefer the extra movement speed after a dodge. This is personal preference. But for your roll, you want movement speed, damage reduction when injured, energy cost reduction, and movement speed when killing an elite. My boots are actually the weakest item I have. Once I get some more alters and get the extra stat points I need for the Paragon board unlocks, I'll ditch these boots for the rolls I suggested. For your amulet, you want 3 ranks of weapon mastery, which is going to give you even more critical strike damage bonus because you're using a crossbow. Cooldown reduction. I unfortunately got imbuement skill cooldown reduction, but the plain cooldown reduction is preferable as that will also apply to your traps. 3 ranks of imbuement skills and energy cost reduction. There are other options like damage with ranged weapons, marksman skill, or imbuement skill damage, which are all good options as well. For your rings, critical strike chance is the most important, then in close second are both critical strike damage and vulnerable damage. Those top 3 are the most important offensive stats, and then finally go for maximum life here as your 4th affix. Honestly, the other damage bonuses, as tempting as they are, aren't going to be as impactful as just plain vulnerable or critical strike damage for your rings. For your crossbow, you want vulnerable damage, critical strike damage, core skill damage as a priority. Then for the 4th affix, go for a damage to close or distant enemies based on how you play Barrage. I tend to play it more like a shotgun up close, so all the barrage arrows hit where I want, so my preference would be for damage to close enemies. For your swords, again the same 4 stats, critical strike damage, vulnerable damage, core skill damage, and damage to close enemies are the priority. So there you have it, my Endgame Barrage Trapper build, which has the perfect blend of massive damage, crowd control, and survivability. If you enjoyed what I talked about today, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Diablo builds as we get into Season 1. I'm Mr. Ronit, and that's it for today. Peace out, guys.